Welcome everybody. We're gonna start any minute now with our mini conference called the Quest Towards Sustainable Value Chains. It's This is sort of the informal part of the webinar. We won't make it that formal though to manage that expectation. But it's very close to 3 p.m. in CEST, that is. So around that time we're gonna get started. But we decided to not make you wait any longer since you arrived on time. So that's great. So welcome. Yeah, and then we're simply gonna get started in a couple of minutes. Anything that we need to think about, Radha, from a housekeeping point of view?
Just the timing. Everything is good otherwise.
Just the timing. Okay. No, that's a challenge in itself, but we'll have a good look at that as well. Yeah. So it's close to 3 p.m. CEST. Excited about this topic and about the program that we have for you today. So and like I said, we will. This is the informal chit chat at the beginning. We will start in a couple of minutes. For those of you, or for sometimes there's late arrivals. Nowadays, people are still quite often back to back in meetings, in webinars and remote meetings. So we'll give it a little bit more time to make sure that we can accommodate everybody's arrival. And then we're going to do our mini conference for 2 hours. With 3 speakers. I'm honored to be one of them, right in the middle. But of course, we have 2 other speakers. I'm very excited about that because we have a speaker that's very well versed in all the models around sustainability and all the angles that you can approach it from. And then we have a speaker as well who's been in the trenches, you could say, who has traveled the globe in the cocoa supply chain and knows ins and outs about how to make those supply chains and value chains, how to make them more sustainable. And then I'm in the heart of the session. Let's see if we can have some interactivity as well when we speak about a topic like sustainability. So looking at the time, Radha, I think it's time that we should get started.
Yep.
I see we have an exclusive audience today, which is fine. So, well, let's then make it official and welcome everybody and start this mini conference called the Quest Towards Sustainable Supply Chain. So we have a small program of 2 hours. We're now right in the opening. After the opening, I already mentioned informally, we have 2 speakers, one at the beginning, one at the end. One is Ed Weenk, who will introduce himself in more detail when it's his turn, and then at the end of the session we have Peter van Grinsven, and he is also very good at introducing himself, so I won't spend too much time on that. We're actually a bit more curious about you, and so but let's not forget this is also a team effort. So we have our speakers, Ed, and myself and Peter, who you see on the right hand side of the screen. So we're going to start with Ed with the green background. Then it's me in the middle and Peter is on the right bottom. But we also have 3 of our colleagues in the call. That's Chiara, that's Elsa, and that's Radha. Without them, this would not be possible. This is a team effort, as we say. So there is no offense without a midfield and a defense. So that is why they are also very much welcome on this picture and to show their faces. But like I said, we want to know a little bit about you as well. And therefore, I'm going to move to Mentimeter because we would like to know a little bit more about where you're from. So we don't have time to listen to everybody's introduction, but if you get out your cell phone or any other device that has a camera, and if you can scan this code, then by means of the code, you can go to a questionnaire that we have set at the ready. Or if QR scanning is a problem, you can also go to www.menti.com that you see on top of your screen, and then enter a numerical code, an 8-digit numerical code with your keyboard. And then we can ask you a question. And by the way, this web address that you see on top of this slide with the numerical code will stay on all the slides that we have prepared for you. So if you missed the QR code for some reason, don't worry. But the first thing that we would like to know a little bit more about is actually, and my screen is not refreshing, and here we go. Yeah, that's me being nervous. That happens to me at the start of webinars as well, human as we are. But we would like to know where you are from. So if you are on Mentimeter and you look at the screen on your device, you can land a pin from actually indicating where you are. And I already see some pins landing. So yeah, that's very good actually. So we have people from India, if I spotted correctly. We have people from North America, and we have people from Europe, multiple, and we have a number of pins in. Maybe there's some more people. Yeah, okay. We have people further up north in Europe, and there's one landing above Great Britain. I hope that doesn't mean that you're swimming at the moment. So this is good to know. So we get a little bit of a feel of where everybody is from. Considering the time zone, we did expect that that most people would be from Europe, from our time zone. That makes a lot of sense, of course. So now we know a little bit more about you as an audience. I would like to go back to my PowerPoint and say, okay, first speaker, I would like to invite Ed as a first speaker and to start sharing his screen as well. And so the first topic is for Ed Weenk. He will introduce himself. Ed, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Hans. Yeah, good to be here. Nice to meet all of you. My name is Ed Weenk. I work as a freelance trainer, teacher, consultant. So a lot of my time I actually spend in schools talking about stuff like supply chain, but also sustainability. Obviously, is creeping into that field more and more. And well, I'm actually collaborating with InChange on a number of things that Hans will address also later on. I've written a few books. I'm writing articles every once in a while, to which I will point also later on. And what I would like to do in the next 15-20 minutes or so is to talk about the story which is behind me, the story of juggling the 3 Ps, which is named after an article I published recently. I will share the link to that article also with you later on if you want to dive a little bit more into the details of that. But the next 15-20 minutes or so, I would like to scratch the surface a little bit of what I've tried to do in this particular article. So juggling the 3 Ps, and it's obviously about the 3 Ps of people, planet, and profit, or as some people like to say, people, planet, and prosperity. And that is a juggling act, right? To unite these 3 dimensions in business in particular. And to that, we could also add, of course, the Sustainable Development Goals as they are published and enforced by the United Nations. This picture, by the way, is called the wedding cake, the SDG wedding cake. So the 17 SDG are basically reflected in 3 different layers, and each of the layers, obviously, you can expect are people, planet, and prosperity. So this is creeping into the business area more and more by legislation, by pressure from the audience, by different reasons, sometimes even from within the companies. But obviously, this is posing challenges to companies, right? So my interest was, okay, how does this then relate to value chain or supply chain? And actually, Carter and Rogers already wrote about this in 2008 in an article they published at the time, where they took this same triple bottom line, as it is also called, and applied it to the supply chain dimension to sort of assess what that would mean for supply chains in companies. And I would like to break that down a little bit further. Many of you may be familiar with the concept of the SCORE model, which is a way to sort of classify, depict, and shape value chains on paper, or visualize them at least. And in addition to that, there's all kinds of other models which speak about, okay, we have the physical infrastructure that we need to find answers to, we have planning control that we need to figure out, we have the information in the systems to figure out. That's all basic supply chain, basic value chain stuff. And then the question I raised in the article is, so what would this look like if we have to add the SDGs or the triple P to the equation? What would that look like? And my initial thinking with the article was, let's just go and revisit all of the classical frameworks in supply chain and operations, the ones that I would deal with in a normal basic operations supply chain course, and to see if they would still hold when we add sustainability to the equation. Now, the good news is most of them will, and I will not dive into the details of all of those, but there's a few where I have my doubts. And that's precisely what I would like to share with you, because basically it's not only about adding the three Ps to the equation as such. There's more and more additional pressure to companies, because at the same time, and we read it all over the place, we have to take into consideration all of our stakeholders, right? That's an easy thing to say, obviously, but first of all, it already implies that you should know who all of your stakeholders are to begin with, which is not always an easy task, no? Let alone to satisfy all of them, because as you can imagine, your stakeholders may actually have quite different viewpoints on these topics. So how do you actually align all of that? And this is a very challenging situation, of course, that we have to deal with. And I would like to take you just through an exercise that I typically do in my classes, just for you to get a flavor of the questions I think we should be raising, right? Because I raised those in a classroom situation, but obviously in a consultancy or in a company, it's exactly the same questions. So let me briefly go through a simple example. Let's take the fast fashion industry. You're all familiar with the fast fashion industry, and it's quite interesting to observe, by the way, that say 5 or 10 years ago, fast fashion was sort of the ultimate, the holy grail of supply chain, right? This is the way we're supposed to do things because it's so quick and so agile. This is absolutely brilliant. It seems that it's backfiring now, because there's quite a lot of things you can actually say about that. No, there is a downside, like we all know in supply chain. There's always a downside to an upside, right? So in this case, what does that actually look like? So let me go to a very simple, straightforward depiction of what could be a fast fashion supply chain. And it's a simplified version, but I think for the case in question, it's okay like this, right? We start obviously up there in the cotton cultivation, right? This is where the raw materials of fast fashion in most cases would come from. Of course, I'm talking here about cotton-based clothing, because of course there's also other clothing raw materials in there. So we're in the fields where the cotton is coming from, and then we start actually producing the materials that go into the clothing finally. So there's weaving, there's dyeing, then there's the actual garments being made, and then, of course, it certainly ends up at some point in time at the consumer. Now, that's all fairly straightforward. And again, fast fashion is famous for doing this extremely quickly, right? With very short life cycles and all that. Now, what happens if we add the juggling the 3P picture to this situation? And that's one of the first questions to ask, right? So, well, let's go step by step. And then you see that suddenly there's a lot of things appearing where maybe from a sustainability point of view, well, you can raise some questions from the use of chemicals, right? Or the excessive use of chemicals, the excessive use of water, countries in which corruption and bribery are pretty normal. Then we have the carbon footprint because there's transportation. There's lots of distances with transportation in there. There's water usage in the manufacturing of the garments. Then there is labor conditions. There's slavery. There's child labor. Then there's tax evasion. Then there's a lot of clothing ending up in landfills without having been worn at all. So there's a lot of many different things which actually, from a sustainability point of view, could be quite alarming. And this is just a simplified example. And actually, the interesting thing, of course, is this is not rocket science at all. You just have to look around you and you see all of these things. Now, then the next question, of course, will be, okay, so let's think of what the operations and supply chain related initiatives could be that a company active as a brand in this fast fashion industry, what kind of initiatives they could come up with to sort of deal with all of these triple P challenges, right? What can you do to improve the social situation of your own laborers, but also of the suppliers' laborers? What can you do to improve the planet dimension, being more environmentally friendly, from carbon footprint to water usage and so forth? So when I do this in a classroom, also again, it's not rocket science. People can come up with a lot of initiatives fairly quickly, because basically all of these little balloons, this is sort of a checklist. Okay, let's for each of these try to come up with ideas to improve the situation. That, by the way, doesn't mean that each of these initiatives are easy to achieve, right? That's another story, but we can come up with at least the ideas of what could be done. But now I have another challenge, because maybe now I have 50 initiatives that I could do. Yeah, but if I'm a company, then probably my resources are limited, either in terms of money, in terms of people, whatever the resources could be. So I need to choose. And then the next challenge comes in, right? Okay, so how do I prioritize? And I would like to highlight at least two things here, because prioritization, of course, can be done on the basis of many different criteria, but I would like to highlight two of these. Now, first of all, there's prioritization in terms of, and as I said before, we know we have to satisfy what our stakeholders want. They have certain needs, so we would like to maybe satisfy those. So first step in the sort of definition of prioritization would be, what do the stakeholders think about all of this, and what does that tell me in terms of which things I should start doing and which things can maybe wait a bit until the others are done. Now we get into schemes like this because engaging all of your stakeholders is incredibly complicated. Why? Well, first of all, there are many different stakeholder groups that you have to deal with, from the people who own your company, the shareholders, to your own staff, to your suppliers, to the local communities, to the legislators, to, all of these different stakeholder groups may actually have their preferences, but there's already a lot of them. Yeah. And then each of those may have a certain opinion around a certain, as we call, ESG topic. Environmental, social, and also governance plays a role in here. Now you can pretty much imagine what a diagram like this looks like if I start populating it with each of the stakeholder groups having different opinions about each of those topics. And now I have to decide what I'm going to be doing, right? Because I have to come with a story towards the stakeholders, telling them that what I'm about to do is actually in their best interest, right? A colleague of mine calls this the guerrilla. This is the stakeholder guerrilla. So basically he's trying to say with that it's a very complex situation, because all of the stakeholders between them might not even agree on what the preferences should be, right? If I'm a shareholder of a company, I might have a totally different opinion about what's important than if I'm somebody working there, or if I'm actually the mayor of the town in which this factory is located, or whether, etc., etc. Now you can sort of get the picture. So that's the first step, when I have to decide, okay, I have these 50 initiatives and they are all promising improvement of sustainability, but I need to decide which one I want to take first, right? And then the question, of course, is, as I said, how to identify and align all those stakeholder interests. This is already an enormous puzzle by itself, right? But then we continue. How to prioritize. Probably most of the initiatives that I want to employ will cost me money, at least as an initial investment, and maybe even bottom line, they will cost me money. So what does that look like from a business case point of view, from a financial point of view? I'm a company, so the last thing I want is to make a loss, obviously, right? You can debate about how much profit you need to make, whether your interest as a company is always profit maximization, but making a loss is definitely not the idea. No, in terms of economic sustainability, making a loss is definitely not an option. So basically, how to prioritize? Then we get to the trade-offs, right? Because I have 50 competing initiatives now. And how can I compare those? So I'm talking here about the return on three Ps, right? typically we tend to think on return on investment as a way to express, how attractive a certain proposal may be. If the ROI is higher, it must be a more attractive initiative. So how does this work in a triple P situation? What's the return on 3P? No, and that is not so trivial actually. So how can we build an equation out of those three dimensions and still come up with a satisfying answer or to the question, which of my initiatives should receive priority, right? Now, in traditional supply chain thinking, traditional supply chain wisdom would say, well, if you have a proposal and there's pros and cons to the proposal, but you want to know if overall this is a good decision. Okay, so if I want to solve a trade-off, I make a business case. I analyze the pros, I analyze the cons, I try to quantify all of those in money, preferably, and most of the cases that works fairly well, which means I can draw a line below, I can add up and subtract everything, and then I have a positive number or a negative number, right? And typically we express that either in return on investment or in net present value or in the expression of payback time. But those are typically the things that we use to decide whether a certain initiative is worthwhile or it's not worthwhile, right? If it's a negative ROI, it's pretty much a bad deal. That's the logic, right? So the question then is, how does this work for a 3P trade-off? Because if I need to put money in, that could be negative, at least initially, from the financial point of view. But what if I gain something on the planet side, but at the same time, actually, I may lose something on the social side, because there is no law that says that whenever I do something that is good for the planet, it's automatically also good for the people. They may be contradictory, actually. So what do I do then, right? There's a lot of talk about relocalization lately. You know that supply chains currently are in a complete mess, first of all because of COVID and now because of the war in Ukraine. So people are saying, bring back production to Europe. At least then we have it local and we don't depend so much on others. Okay, that's great. But that means we're killing jobs in China. End of story. I mean, this is also a social dimension. Okay, and now you can, of course, debate what you find more important, right? But these are complex equations, very complex equations. So then I asked people in the classroom, if I do this in a certain class, say, okay, take one of those initiatives that you came up with and tell me what the business case for this particular proposal would look like. And of course, I'm not going to ask them to quantify in money exactly. You don't have the data for that, not in a classroom situation, but you can do some reasoning and ask yourself the question, can it actually be quantified, right? And yeah, that's not always so trivial. How to quantify? I mean, how do I quantify in money deforestation? How do I do that? I mean, what's the value I look for? I mean, what's the basis there, right? Or how do I quantify the creation of 2 jobs? How do I do that? So the benefits I'm talking about, the sustainability benefits, I can maybe quantify what it would cost me to achieve it, but I want to return. What's the benefit of it? And that's not so easy, I think. Hans will talk about carbon footprint later on. Well, carbon footprint is taking us already quite a long time to actually come up with standards, right? And in some places there's still debate about those if we go further into the chain. So those things, I think we need to be realistic about those, that we may not have the answers yet. In addition to that, many people tend to approach, from the narrative side, they tend to approach the triple P or the triple bottom line discussion looking for the win-win-wins. Try to find the initiatives where the 3 dimensions win. Obviously, yeah, who would be against that? But those are the easy ones. No, those are the no-brainers. If there's a win-win-win, nobody will challenge you because it's a win-win-win. So that's not the difficult one. The difficult one is a win-win-lose, or a win-lose-win, or a lose-win-win, or whatever the other combination. As long as there is a lose in there, I will have to dissatisfy somebody. And the question, of course, is, if I come with a proposal in which I cannot have a win-win-win, what will I sacrifice first? That's bottom line, the real question, I think. And then we get into opinions. Then we get back to the stakeholders, because some stakeholders will say, okay, then sacrifice that first. Sacrifice the money first. And other stakeholders say, no, you can never sacrifice the money because it's my money. So we have to then maybe satisfy the people first, or sacrifice the people first. I mean, those are the debates, right? And those are tricky ones. Those are tricky ones, right? Because the answer depends on who you ask, which means there is a degree of subjectivity creeping into the discussion, which is always difficult, of course. So the question is, what does a 3P business case actually look like? And in all honesty, I don't think I've seen one. I think that's the point where we are, right? Conceptually speaking, I think we're starting to see what's necessary, but we maybe haven't entered into the solution yet. So one of the things that I'm playing around with, at least to see if it works, I mean, this is pretty basic stuff, is at least, okay, let's make a spider web diagram or a radar diagram, as some other people would call this, and then I will identify for each of the 3 dimensions, people, planet, and prosperity, a number of topics that are related to each of those 3 dimensions, which are important to my business, right? This is the concept, by the way, of materiality. Some of the people here in the meeting who are more familiar with accounting standards, you may be familiar with the concept of materiality. Materiality is now also applied to sustainability, for example. No, if I'm a major coffee company, of course I can announce proudly that I've put solar panels on my headquarters. But probably there's some other things in the coffee industry that are a bit more important from a sustainability point of view than solar panels on my buildings, right? For example, slavery, for example, deforestation, and these kinds of things. So that's what materiality is about. So I want to focus on the material criteria. What are the things which are really, really big in my particular industry in terms of those 3 dimensions? And then I can score those. And the attractive thing, of course, of a spider web or a radar diagram is that you can basically leave every parameter in its own dimension. It's not necessary to express everything in money, right? And what you then get is to all of those initiatives for improving the sustainability, you score them before and after, for example, or the current situation and the expected future situation when the initiative has been carried out. And then the surface below the graphic will tell you, okay, the surface of sustainability becomes bigger overall or becomes smaller overall. Then at least we have a basis. Again, that doesn't solve the issue of what do we do in the win-win-lose situations. That's still a judgment at this stage, no? Because we're not able to quantify everything in money. So I think that's where we are at this moment. So for the 3P trade-off, the question of what a 3P business case actually looks like, my take on it currently is that we may not have the instruments to do that properly. I think we are getting to the concepts, at least conceptually, how could we do this? For example, the initiative or the concept of true pricing, or true cost is a way of incorporating in a financial way, maybe, all of these externalities, the damage done by insustainability. However, we get into this point of the required information, right? There's no agreement yet on what is the best way to express deforestation, what is the best way to express improvement in slavery, what is the best, etc., etc. And then, of course, the next step is access to this information. How can I reliably collect it so that I can incorporate it into my business case equations? So wrapping this up, we may not yet have the instruments. We may not have all of the required information for building true triple bottom line business cases. But I want to end on a positive note, because basically it shouldn't stop us from moving on, if only by raising awareness about those trade-offs, and that they are complex. Because I hear a lot of narrative in terms of triple bottom line, in terms of sustainability, basically sketching this is where we should end up. Okay, fair enough, I agree. But how do we get there? And that's many times the unanswered question. And if you want to really incorporate that into, daily business, it starts with awareness, of course. And I think that's a very important step. First of all, that people start seeing, okay, we shouldn't only look at the financial side of it, but really a little bit more detailed. What are the social benefits of a certain thing, or what are the ecological benefits of a certain initiative, and then offset those with the financial part, or add them all up. The win-win-wins do exist, yes, but my take on it is that the win-win-wins will turn out to be the low-hanging fruit of sustainability, right? Those are the no-brainers. You don't need to discuss on those. It's a win-win-win. Who could be against that, right? So once again, we may not have the instruments yet, we may not have the information yet, but we should, of course, still work hard, make little steps forward, hopefully, in building those instruments, in getting the information, and working on awareness, on juggling these 3 Ps. I mentioned the article I wrote about it. I will share the link to this article. You see it here on the page, but I will paste that into the chat box here in the meeting in a few moments. If you want to read a little bit more about this more extensively in the article that I wrote about this. So I would like to leave it here. Looking at the time, then probably the Master of Ceremonies should help us if there's any time for questions.
There is some time for questions. Yeah. There's certainly some time for questions. What do we have, Radha?
So far, it seems that everything was very clear, Ed. So if anyone has any questions, they could place them in the chat. Yeah.
I always joke, Ed, if either on one hand, I was too intimidating if there's no question, or I was crystal clear. But to add my 5 cents, this feeds in very nicely with what I will do in a moment as part of the agenda. You said it's to have a picture of where you want to end up is nice, but we need to get started. And I think that's a big takeaway. That's a very big takeaway.
Yeah, I hope so. I think we've reached the point, because every time when there's something new happening, or something, a new development, or we need, of course, to start with putting a new point on the horizon. I mean, that's totally clear.
We have a question, by the way, if I may interrupt you, Ed. We have a question, I see. And that is from Pablo Vargas, and he says, what is the, not an easy question, I think, what is the biggest challenge of a trade-off?
I mean, I think the challenge with the trade-off itself hasn't really changed. It's just there's more dimensions to the equation, right? And I think that maybe we are currently, we still have to teach people, that's the awareness point I mentioned, that whenever they have a certain decision to make, or a certain investment to do, or a project to launch, that it's not only the financial payback that should be requested from them, because normally somebody authorizes a certain decision, but that we also include sustainability dimensions, so the people and the planet part into that, and that should become normal. It's not normal yet. It should become normal, right? So, and that links, by the way, to your next comment, Pablo. I mean, what are the KPIs? I think this is precisely the point where we are. We have no clue yet. If you look at different reports related to triple bottom line, or you read reports or models or frameworks related to ESG, environmental, social, and governance, of course, they all talk about the same dimensions, but they all come up with different KPIs, right? Which is hopelessly confusing, of course, if you're starting in this area. So there is no consensus yet. A friend of mine, he's an accounting and controlling expert, and he says, yeah, the generally accepted accounting principles, the GAAP, those standards for accounting practices, took us about 40 years before we agreed on those. And then you can only hope that we will be a little bit faster this time, right? But there's a good degree of subjectivity in there, right? And I think that's something to just be considering, right? So non-financial reporting, as you say, yeah, exactly. There's no alignment about those. So it helps in the awareness, right? But at some point in time, we need to come up with a way to express those decisions or the decision making or the trade-offs or the business cases, hopefully in one dimension, because otherwise the subjectivity will always be a factor, right? And that also relates to governance. I mean, governance, one of the elements to governance is accountability. Who can make which decisions without needing to ask approval? Well, you better have good standards in place, because otherwise people start making decisions which you will be, having troubles with later on, right? So we need to give people instruments to judge their own decisions if we want to move on with that, right? That's a tricky one. And once again, I believe we're just starting to see the complexity of this. Yeah. Peter, you're asking the green score. I have to say that I don't know all of the details of green score. My suspicion is that it is basically moving into the same direction as all of the other intents, right? To basically add sustainability parts to the equation. In this case, green may lead me to think that it's mainly the planet and not necessarily also the people part. But basically, yeah, I mean, anything is helpful. What you see currently, and it's worrying me a little bit, is that ESG measuring, because there's ESG rankings popping up, mainly for the investment world, right? So that investors can compare companies who claim to be sustainable in a certain way. You see ESG rankings, right? Because before it was basically, it's very simple, no? You look at the stock exchange, and then that's already a ranking in a way, no? And you look at the annual reports, and you have your financial indicators. Now, ESG measurement is becoming a business in itself, and that is not helpful, I believe, because everybody comes up with their own standards there. So either it's going to be a winner-take-all industry, and then we have the standards of the winner in the future, could be. I would be interested to see how that will evolve. But it's something that I see. If you type in ESG in Google or ESG metrics, probably the first so many hits that you get are either from software companies or consultancies. That's a very telling thing, I believe. Yeah, and it's another illustration of the complexity of this. It's not the topic of today's presentation, but look at certification, eco labels, for example, or social sustainability labels. I mean, this is a business in itself. It's very difficult to see which label to choose over the other ones. It's a competition going on, right? It's a business in itself, and that goes together with scandals, and it goes together with well, it's learning the hard way, I guess, which probably Peter will talk about later on. This is complex stuff, and I think for the moment the biggest mistake we can commit is that we stick to the simplistic narrative about sustainability. No, this is not simple. This is very complicated. And that's fantastic. It's a great challenge. I mean, it's fantastic to be in there, to be quite honest, no? Because there's a lot of questions that need answers still. But let's not simplify the narrative, because it's complex. This is complex.
Thank you, Ed. And a nice detail here, Peter Murray, whom you just answered the question from. He was one of the first clients of international clients of the Fresh Connection. I think it was in December 2009, that Ege and myself were in the US doing a training on the invitation of Peter. So Peter, very good to have you in the call. That's actually super. I will start sharing my screen again, because I have to take over if I have the agenda properly in my head. So here we go. Thank you very much, Ed, for painting, as it says, the current landscape. And you mentioned, like I already said, a big takeaway. We need to get started, and then actually you go to an area where we as InChange like to operate, because we believe in experiential learning, getting started, having a hands-on mentality. So that is what I will. That's what I will be presenting on. Actually, I will have you work with me, because we think that's a good way of approaching it. So my name, Hans Kremer, I represent InChange. And at InChange, if we want to explain what we're doing, we actually go about like this. And that gives away that we're from the Netherlands, perhaps, because everybody in the Netherlands, as some of you or perhaps most of you know, we ride bicycles. We even have more bicycles in our country than we have inhabitants. So how do you think we learned it? Or if you ride a bicycle yourself, you know the answer to this question, right? You probably, this is a bit of a rhetorical question, as they say. Did your parents give you a lecture, slideshow, make you read a manual? Most likely not. They probably learned, you learned the hard way, as they sometimes refer to it. So learning by doing is a very powerful way of learning. That's what we at InChange believe very much in. And then we focus on learning about managing value chains and supply chains in many areas. Sustainability being a recent topic that we added. Circularity is there as well. And why do we do this? Why do we believe so strongly in this? Because when you make people go through an experience, like we can never unlearn to ride our bicycles. You retain it a lot longer. So it's a very powerful way of learning. Listening has its virtues. You're listening to me now. Seeing has its virtues as well. You already retain more of it, but experiential learning is probably the most powerful way of learning. So that's what we believe in a lot. And we also think that learning should be engaging and should be immersive. If we refer to our children, then if they play a consumer game, and they need to come to dinner, they say, let me finish the level. They're so engaged, they're so immersed. But we also had it with our books when we were younger, and my generation at least, I should say. In the analog world, where I used to read books as a kid, let me finish the chapter, please. I was so immersed and so engaged. And then you learn, not because I want to teach you something. You learn because you want to learn yourself. So that's also what we believe in and what we try to practice. So when it comes to sustainability, we think that also is very applicable. We only have 40 minutes to juggle. My part of the presentation is 40 minutes in length. So as Ed said, we need to prioritize. I need to do the same thing. We need to practice what we preach here. So I will focus on the P of planet. And for this session only, and then I will look especially at the carbon footprint. Ed already gave that away a bit, so very good mentioning that, Ed. Thank you for that. So we look especially at carbon footprint, which is a topic that already got our attention in 2012 because we made it a module inside the Fresh Connection simulation. And I just mentioned Peter Murray going over to the US for first training. That was with the Fresh Connection. That is our you could say our oldest simulation, but also very much still a current one, and that's what we're going to use. So what is then the Fresh Connection? Like all of our simulations, they are a learning experience, there's the word experience again, built around a cross-functional business simulation. So they sit in the cloud, our simulations, so you can access them from anywhere as long as you have a device to go to the internet. You use our simulations and our learning programs as teams of 4 people, because we do think that managing value chains and supply chains is a team sport. You're in this together. As I already said at the beginning of the presentation as well, there can be no offense without a midfield and a defense. We need to work together as a team here. We have in all of our simulations 4 available so-called VP roles. So the good news is that whenever people enter a training, they get promoted right away. They become a VP and they become responsible for a functional area in the business. And then also referencing consumer games that I mentioned, we can play at multiple levels of complexity. We have add-ons and we have all kinds of so-called variants to enrich the experience. Not to showcase content, but of course to satisfy learning goals that our clients have or potentially have. So yeah, what is then the Fresh Connection besides this simulation? Some of you in the call, I saw some familiar names, so some of you already know, but for some of you who don't know about it, it's also the name of a producer of fruit juices in the Netherlands. And it's not doing well. It's running at a loss. And that is, in a different sense of the word, also not sustainable. So that needs to change. We need to turn the business around. And luckily, you are all here because now we can represent and be the management team all together. And we can start turning the business around to make it profitable again, but in this case also try to reduce its carbon footprint. Because our retail clients have told us that they also find that pretty important nowadays. And so times have changed. Like I said, we developed Fresh Connection already, used it in 2010. in the US, but times have changed. It's 2022 now, and we need to pay close and serious attention to what's going on in carbon. So a little bit more about the Fresh Connection before I make an educated guess about what we're going to do and how that will play out. Fresh Connection supply chain, a fruit juice company. We need to source 5 components that you see on the left: orange pulp, mango pulp, a vitamin C additive, and 2 types of packaging, cartons and PET bottles. And from there on, these components go into an inbound warehouse. From the inbound warehouse, they are being thrown together, you could say, and they're being mixed, and then they're being bottled, and then we create 6 finished products that go into our outbound warehouse. And from there on, these products go to 3 retailers. And these 3 retailers, they buy our 6 finished products. Although for those of you who have a good eye, they already see that one of these clients is only interested in part of the assortment, because we make 1-liter cartons with juice and we make PET bottles with juice. And the client called Dominic's at the bottom here, that's actually a convenience store next to a gas station. So they're only interested in the little PET bottles. They only sell those. So what is then our footprint? So not our carbon footprint, but our physical footprint on the face of the earth. Well, we have the Fresh Connection in the Netherlands as a factory. We have suppliers around us where we source these 5 components from. They're actually scattered across the globe. And then we have 3 retail clients that sit in the Netherlands. That's what we serve. So you have also a little bit of an idea of what our physical footprint across on the face of the earth looks like. And besides that, yeah, we deal with silos. So that's one of the reasons that the Fresh Connection is not doing so well. In all these 4 areas that we need to manage, and I didn't even specifically mention them so clearly, but we need to manage purchasing, operations, sales, and supply chain, those functional departments. We've just become the head of all of these departments, and we need to manage those departments, and they need to work together. And at the moment, in a bit of a traditional sense, they are not doing so. They're silos. You see all kinds of traits that they have and how they behave as usual suspects, seen through the eyes of other people. Purchasing keeping spend low, operations focusing at cost, sales promising the moon without knowing if it's available, and then in supply chain planning, we're ironing out all kinds of problems. That's a traditional role that you often see there. So we have silos that we also need to deal with. Now, yeah, then let's have a look. Let's have a look at the Fresh Connection, and let me paint the landscape in a little bit more detail. Let me go over to the Fresh Connection that you can see here. And this is the cockpit where we as a new management team that just got onboarded can look at how things are going. At the moment, you see that our so-called return on investment, Ed already mentioned the metric as well, return on investment being important, is negative. So the last round that we did, and the 4 last round that we did, minus 5.9%, we became a little bit better in our so-called round number 2. So we already had a number of instances that we tried. And that is because if we go to our functional area of sales, then in the sales department, if I look at what I promised to my customers in round number 2, looking at my so-called decision log, then I'm promising 95% of service level to my customer food and groceries, but also to my customer land markets and to my customer Dominic's. I'm promising them all 3 95% of service level. Now, if I'm going to look at my customer report, and by the way, for those of you also paying attention, service level type is order line. So that's how I'm being measured. That's also what if I'm promising a service level, I want to be measured on order lines. That's part of the agreement that I have with my clients. So if I look at my customer report now of my last so-called round, then I can see on the column service level and order lines that I'm way below my 95%. So I'm 91.2, 92.1, 93.2 for my 3 customers. And that's why my customers are not happy. And that is why my customers are so-called penalizing me, because if I look at my realized revenue, then based on what I promised, they were willing to pay me a lot more money than I see as realized revenue. If I look at the contracted sales revenue, my promise, how they express that in terms of I'm willing to pay you a certain amount of revenue if you deliver me at 95%, they are penalizing me at the moment. And so that is deducted. So that is why I'm, amongst others, that is one of the reasons that I'm running at a loss. There's lots of more causes there as well. But my customers are very unhappy, as I said. So, and actually sales, they're silos. So sales are saying, yeah, those guys and girls in purchasing and operations and supply chain, they're underperforming. I'm making a promise here and they're underperforming. Whereas the other pieces and people in the team say, no, sales is over-promising. So they're not really working together. And another thing now is, in round number 3, we also need to start taking into consideration the so-called carbon footprint. Because like I said, that has come to the forefront, that has become important to our clients. So our clients are asking us to make a promise on carbon footprint. And at the moment, I'm promising to produce 1 kilogram of carbon per liter of juice that I sell to my clients. And that's the same for all my 3 clients. I'm promising 1 kilogram per liter of juice sold. Now, how do I know if that is close to reality, yes or no? Well, luckily, besides my financial overview, I have a carbon footprint report as well. And that carbon footprint report tells me very precisely how much carbon I'm producing. First of all, in total, I see that at the bottom. That's over 5 million kilograms, 5.6 million kilograms. And divided by 4.6 million liters of juice that I sell, I'm producing 1.22 kilograms of carbon per liter of juice that I sell. And my promise is 1 kilogram only. So the question that I have for you, since the team is so siloed and since they're blaming each other, there's one saying overperforming, there's others are underperforming, there's others saying overpromising, and actually the person in sales doesn't take this carbon footprint idea seriously enough. So they're doing nothing. They're expecting, sales is expecting that the rest of the organization will do a better job to live up to the 95% service level, whereas the rest of the organization is sort of expecting sales to be more realistic and promise less. So they're not doing anything. This is paralysis analysis. So I'm going to calculate the outcome now, and also including what is happening in carbon. And I'm going to ask you, whilst I calculate, what do you think will happen if we go to the Mentimeter question? So if you go back to Mentimeter, where we were when we did where we were coming from, then you can go to www.menti.com if you've gone out, and you can key in this code. What do you think will happen if we ignore our customers, especially their wish for less carbon emissions, because we promised them to do 1 kilo only? And what do you think will happen to the outcome of this particular round, as we call it in the Fresh Connection, if we calculate how we're doing financially, or how we're going to perform in terms of carbon footprint? Do you think there will be no consequences at all? Things will actually sort of stay as they are. Do you think that the carbon footprint will perhaps increase, or perhaps the carbon footprint will decrease? Or will we get extra penalties because we're missing our carbon footprint promise? Now, this is a bit of a softball question to get you into the game. So I see a lot of bulbs near an answer option that I think is actually quite realistic. Customers don't like that you don't do anything about what they ask for. So if carbon becomes important to them, and you give them a promise of 1 kilo per liter of juice sold, and you don't make any other changes, then most likely you will get the same carbon performance that you had in the round before. So there might also not be that many good reasons for carbon footprint to either increase or decrease. And I do also think I expect that we will get extra penalties for missing our carbon footprint. But let's just have a look, because hopefully the simulation has done what it should do. And now look here. Actually, we got hit by a lower ROI number, and that tells me that maybe, yes, we did get extra penalties. Okay, so extra penalties. Where do the extra penalties come from? And we can already tell by the numbers that we see on screen, realized revenue has gone down. So looking here, contracted sales revenue is exactly the same, because we didn't make any changes to the contract. We got a contract delivered from our last round, but now suddenly, since we are ignoring the fact that we are not living up to our carbon footprint promise, we get even more penalties there than we had because of penalties, more penalties than we had for service level, not meeting our service level. So does that then also show up in our carbon footprint report? Well, our carbon footprint report looks actually quite dull because we didn't make any other changes in our supply chain. Then yeah, from round number 3 to 4, I should say from round number 2 to 3, to be honest, nothing changed. We are still at 1.22 kilograms of carbon per liter reduced salt. So now what we can do, we need to start looking at, if we start all the way upstream, what can we then do to drive this number down and hopefully at the same time improve in terms of profitability? Because Ed also pointed out, if you get win-win-lose situations, or lose win-win, or win-lose-win, or other formulas where there's a word of lose in there, yeah, that's not gonna move the needle a lot. That's not gonna motivate companies to do a lot. So can we at the same time reduce carbon and therefore reduce the penalty that we are incurring at the moment, and become more profitable as well? And if we look at our total carbon production being 5.6 million, then a very big chunk out of there sits, out of these 5.6 million kilograms of carbon we're producing, 3.2 million sit with my suppliers, with the contracts that I have with them. And also quite a big part sits in their inbound transport towards us. So maybe I can do something there. So I'm going to the purchasing situation or the purchasing area now, and I'm going to take a look at the contracts that I have, and especially if I'm going to pick some low-hanging fruit there. And let me go back to finance for one moment as well. If we look at where we're spending lots of our money in terms of purchase value, then we're spending a lot on PET bottles, and we're spending a lot on oranges. So yeah, if I start making new deals, that is also drawing the attention towards me. And there's another thing I would like to look at. If I go to supply chain and I go to my last round, how well were these suppliers doing? And I would like to take a look at component availability, because if I'm going to make changes, I might as well factor that in. And I see, for instance, my vitamin C being my poorest supplier of all, also giving me a component availability. That's the fourth column from the right of your screen. Component availability for vitamin C only 84%. So if I'm going to take a look at the items where I spend a lot of money on, I'm also going to take a look at vitamin C, because that also hurts me in terms of making products that need vitamin C. So I'm going back to purchasing, and I'm going actually. I'm going to go to round number 4. That's the round that I'm playing, and I'm going to look at the supplier market. First of all, I'm going to take a look at my PET bottles, and let's see what I can do there. I'm going to do a search here, and PET bottles is driving around air. It's plastic, by the way, as well. So at the moment, I'm having a supplier. That's my current supplier that sits in Spain, that has a lead time of 10 days. I'm even buying poor quality from them. But I also have, if I look at alternatives, I have a supplier much closer by. Actually, they sit in the Netherlands. So that's actually quite a good deal, because if they drive around less with a bulky product like an empty PET bottle, that's what I want. By the way, I also want to have high quality. I don't believe so much in poor quality. And since I use, and that's what I know by heart from the simulation, I use a lot of these bottles each week. So I can easily buy them in a full truckload, and that's a deal that I make. So I have now replaced my my PET supplier. I also want to take a look at oranges. Where am I getting my oranges from? At the moment, I'm getting my oranges from Florida, and the contract is still here. You can see it here. So Miami oranges, my current supplier from the United States, do I have an alternative? And actually the alternative sits above that. It sits in Spain. That's a lot closer. So that actually looks quite attractive to me. So I'm going to negotiate with them, buying high quality, and actually I'm going to bring it in by boat as well. So I can change the transport mode here. I think that's even more carbon friendly. I'm going to buy it in tanks as a trade unit. I use a lot of fruit pulp. And so I'm going to put that in as a deal. And then I said I wanted to do something about vitamin C as well, because I didn't like what was going on there. Vitamin C, what do we have here? Vitamin C at the moment coming all the way from China for a product that I use very little of. But if I don't have it, I'm in deep trouble. So I'm going to the Netherlands. It's about having it. I'm also going to negotiate quite high delivery reliability. I was at 90% only from China. I'm going to put this at 99. By the way, I don't need so much of this each week. So my trade units is, I'm going to set that to be somewhat smaller. So now I've done actually quite a bit. So what I did, I changed my orange supplier from Florida to Spain, a lot closer by. I changed my PET supplier from Spain to the Netherlands, which was, I think, a good change in terms of how much empty bottles I drive around. And then I changed my vitamin C supplier from China to the Netherlands as well. So if I now calculate this outcome, I want you to help me in terms of where you think this will now go. So the changes that I introduced with my suppliers, will that give me a better component availability, you think? And will that also, because that's what I try to focus on, will that give me less carbon footprint solely from the supplier choices alone? Or perhaps will I get less carbon footprint from inbound transport, because I made quite some changes when it comes to where my suppliers were located? And will I also have then overall perhaps less purchase value? So if you can use on your device, just like you answered the former question, if you can give me some answers here about what you think will happen in terms of where results will go, then yeah, then let's see. Less carbon footprint from inbound transport seems to be the favorite for now. Better component availability, yeah, that might also be the case, especially looking at vitamin C. Less carbon footprint from suppliers. I didn't give you all the details there. Normally, if we play a setup like this, we also give you an idea about the so-called emission index. So you can sort of inform yourself about how sustainable these suppliers claim that they are. You never know in real life, but how sustainable they claim that they are. But we see a lot, actually, most of the answers go towards, you expect to have less carbon from the inbound to transport, and then less carbon from your suppliers. Better component availability, just as popular. Less purchase value is not chosen that often, but that's perhaps a bit understandable, because we have defined purchase value as not only what you pay for the components, but we include transportation there as well. So that's a little nitty gritty detail that I didn't inform you about. That may have changed that might have changed your answer. But it's not about only the good answers here. It's about what you think will happen and to get you on board in this session. Now, what happened here? We went from minus 8.8 to minus 2.3. That's a big step forward. So did we get better component availabilities to start with? Well, we had in our supply chain, we had our report on components. And let's look here. So component availability, first of all, delivery reliability for vitamin C, that changed big time. So that was good. And now I have 100% even of component availability for vitamin C. And that might even be a bit overdoing it. But like I said, I spend very little money on vitamin C. So if I have that lying around, too much of it, it's less than 200 liters a week that I use. Spend is only a couple of thousand for each round that I play. So that's not a big deal. So yeah, I do have better component availability. Did I get less carbon from my suppliers? Let's have a look there, because that's intriguing. Did I get less carbon from my suppliers? If we look at the top line, well, actually I got a little bit more carbon there. That's not what the Big Bang is. The Big Bang is actually in transportation. Yeah, because we chose suppliers, especially those that bring us large volumes. We chose them to be closer by, and especially the Philip Jones one. Look here, what happened there. That's actually a very big change. So Trio Pet, they were in Spain. They were driving around empty bottles towards us, to the Netherlands. And now we said, nah, that's no longer necessary. They're now in the Netherlands with us. So that's a really big change. So the supplier themselves do not really influence the carbon so much, but the inbound transportation does. And did I get less purchase value? And that's why I not gave you all the information. Purchase value includes transport costs as well. So this does that then also factor in cost of goods sold, purchase value. Yeah, here you see it actually. Okay, so you also see the change, especially from Trio Pet to Philip Jones. We kicked out the money that we spent on Trio, and in return we got money spending on Philip Jones. And the difference that you see is mainly connected to transportation value. For the other ones, we don't see a whole lot. I already mentioned on vitamin C, having too much of it doesn't really matter because you spend very little money on it. So that's all about availability. Now, having said that, there's another Fred, hear me, Ed, I should say, Ed. The world around us is changing. So our PET bottles that we source in very large quantities, and let me show you that as well. If we go to round number 4, the last round that we just finished, if we go to the component report again, then looking at what we're dealing with in terms of demand per week expressed in pieces or liters, that's a little column that you see in the middle of your page. I just highlighted the header. Then you see there's a very big difference in terms of what we are using, the quantities that we are using. And we're using packaging material quite a bit. Then we use a humongous amount of PET bottles. That's totally crazy. It's off the charts. Then we use a lot of orange pulp actually for orange goes into each of the 6 products that we make. We use some mango, a couple of thousand liters each week. And then, like I said, very little vitamin C. Now, yeah, I already mentioned it. PET, that is plastic, right? So what if we could do something about that? So our manufacturing engineers and our product engineers, they looked around us and they found that you can buy a piece of equipment by which you can inflate your own PET bottle. So then you can stick with the same supplier, but they will deliver you so-called preformed PET bottles. And these preformed PET bottles, they cost half of what a fully inflated PET bottle costs, and they only take up 1/10 of the space. So imagine that. That will be a lot less trucks that need to drive towards you. That also reduces the need for space in your inbound warehouse considerably. Probably the people doing the work in the inbound warehouse, there's a lot less work because now if they unload a full pallet, there's 10 times as many PET bottles on there than before, if we were to go for that. And so that has a lot of benefits. But yeah, like I said, the investment is 700,000. And we also need to pay each round operational expenses to operate this piece of equipment. That's 70,000. So we're going to invest 700,000 extra. We're going to pay 70,000 extra to operate this piece of equipment. But yeah, we want to go there. That's the way of the future, we think. We also have a number of projects that we can go into in our operations area. And in our operations area, if we go to our bottling area, there's a number of projects that we can go into as well. And they're called, you can decrease water usage, decrease of so-called startup productivity losses, meaning if you switch from one product to the other or from a packaging type to the other, then you have less so-called startup productivity losses. And you can decrease your energy usage. So in this particular area, we can do lots of things. So we're simply going all in, like Ed's saying, it's just about getting started. So we're gonna do the inflate PET bottles. We're gonna buy this piece of equipment. We're gonna invest 700,000. That is in. Then we're gonna go full in on all these carbon reducing measures. So we're gonna save that. And not only that, we're being quite courageous here. So we're also gonna take a look at our inbound warehouse, because if I'm gonna use solar, if my need for space, because I'm bringing in these preformed small PET bottles that are only 1/10 of the size of my fully inflated ones, I'm gonna reduce the warehouse to 200 locations, and I'm gonna reduce the staff. And by the way, Ed, sorry about that. In terms of ESG, that's not really social, but I'm gonna reduce the staff by laying off 4 people. And I'm going to save that. Actually, this is a beautiful example of conflicting objectives here. So that is now all in. Yeah, let's calculate. And what I would like to ask you then now is, what do you think will happen in terms of, if we run these investments? We're going to invest a steep amount of money, 700K. We're going to add 70K in operating expenses. And by the way, the 3 carbon reduction projects that I did is going to add another 25K. So we're going to spend 95K extra to reduce our carbon. And we're going to invest 700K extra as well. So do you think that how will this play out? Will we reduce carbon, but perhaps at the same time also our return on investment? Or even worse, will we get more carbon, and will we reduce ROI? Or yeah, like I'm seeing the answer options now flipping around on my screen. So yeah, looking at what I've read already, perhaps carbon will decrease and ROI will increase. That would be actually the most beneficial outcome. And then, of course, it could also be that carbon does decrease, but at the same time at the expense of ROI. And that's actually where we would not like to be. This can happen. This can happen. But if that happens too often, then I'm afraid that many for-profit businesses will say, perhaps reducing my carbon footprint is not the best idea, right? And then we're back into the stakeholder decision as well. But yeah, who knows what comes out of here? So what happened? What happened with what we did in terms of project engineering and manufacturing engineering? And let's see. So going over here, oops, whoa, well, we made a very big jump ahead. So we went from a minus 2.3 where we were to a 5.5 plus 5.5 ROI. So we can at least say that our ROI went up. Right? If we look at how our ROI went up, because we took quite a number of measures here. So we're also, by the way, already in an area where we have less penalties on carbon, and that's also being reduced. Remember that we started out with 200 in our last round where we did our supplier changes and where we reduced especially carbon connected to inbound transport. We already got less penalties for carbon. We still have penalties for carbon, but they have been reduced. And for service level, actually, we are in a position that we get little bonuses. That means we are doing a little better than we are promising. Do we do better for all our 3 clients? Yeah. And for carbon footprint, what is the situation there? Okay, so ROI has gone up, that is clear, but has carbon footprint now also been reduced? Let's have a look here at the bottom. Yeah, it went from 1.158 to 1.118. So that's actually quite good. Where does it appear? Well, especially energy on bottling lines, where we could do this project. So that has been quite helpful. What else has happened? Inbound transportation, Philip Jones. Yeah, they were already pretty close by, so that is helpful here. Pallet locations, inbound warehouse. Well, look here. That has also been pretty good. That also plays out financially then as well. To go back to finance one more time, we said we are going to reduce the warehouse and lay off staff. That didn't sound, especially laying off the staff, that didn't sound so very nice. But yeah, you can see here, I reduced the warehouse big time, and that is saving me 70,000. And there's a little number below my 20,000 that I have in cost for the current warehouse that says overflow. So only in a few cases my inbound warehouse was too small. And when I look at handling, then I can also see that inbound handling reduced big time here as well, and only a little overtime there. So that was actually, those were good changes. Now, okay, having said that, if I go to the main cockpit, minding the time as well, if I go to the main cockpit, my ROI figures are good. My gross margin is going up. But what I do see is I still have considerable so-called obsolete products. And that means that I'm dealing with food products here. And I need to promise a big part of the so-called shelf life of my food products to my retail customers. Now, if my product is no longer fresh enough, compared to the promise that I make my customers about freshness when I deliver, then my inventory is actually getting too old. And then I need to throw it away. And if I'm looking at it right now, that's around 9%, and that's related to demand. So 9% of demand is actually going to a customer called the garbage bin, and they don't pay us very well. So that's pure waste. So I would like to do something about that. And I have actually, don't get scared here now, but I have a plethora of things that I can do, little tweaks that I can do. And I'm going to do them all to also challenge you a bit. And then I would like you to tell me what you think will be the outcome. Having said that, looking at my product report also, so I have this 8.8% of obsoletes. I can get a little bit more detail on that in my supply chain area, where I have a nice product report. And that product report gives me at the product level what my obsoletes are. So you can see here, that is again the fourth column from, or the fifth column from the right. You see that there's quite some obsoletes going on. It's more or less the same for all my products. So that's not a great idea. So what I'm about to do is, first of all, I'm going to involve sales again. Sales has not said so much anymore after ignoring their customers' plea for minding carbon, and they've come around a bit. So I've managed to talk to them and say, hey, please go back to your clients, because we are in a retail business, and in retail they run many promotions with our products, and that gives us a lot of volatility in our demand patterns. But if we would know a little bit sooner about these promotions coming, then actually we could anticipate better on that. So if you can lengthen the so-called promotion horizon, so clients are telling me earlier on that they're going to run promotions in their stores, we can do a lot better in terms of delivery performance. And then we need less safety stock. Less safety stock means less inventory, means a fresher product. Then I can do probably a lot better in terms of obsoletes as well. So sales is paying attention to what we're saying. So yeah, they're going to all three clients and saying, okay, we're going to do this longer promotion horizon with our clients, and we're going to plug that in. Of course, the contracted sales revenue will drop a bit, because customers don't like to tell me that early on about their promotions that they plan with our products. But still, that's a trade-off. That's all in the works there. So I have a middle promotion horizon now for all my three clients. At the same time, going to supply chain, looking at how flexible I am in my production plan, I'm saying I need to be more flexible here as well, because if I go below my reorder point for any of my products, I would like to be able to replan production, and so I want to be my frozen period of production. I would like that to be 1 week instead of 3 weeks. That makes me way more responsive. So that is now in, and since I'm becoming more responsive, and since I know a lot more about my promotions, about the promotions that my retailers plan with me, actually I want to create a fresher product at the same time as well. So I'm going to produce more often. And let me also do this one. I'm going to produce more often. That's giving me a fresher product, giving me less obsoletes. And like I said, since I know more about volatility, I can do it less safety stock as well. So if I produce more often, if I get less safety stock, then I'm having less inventory in total. That will absolutely help me in terms of making sure I have a fresh enough product compared to the promise that I have out there. And last but not least, since I'm going to do more changeovers, I'm going to ask my operations VP, can you please involve single minute exchange of die as a project that will help me reduce changeover times. I'm going to do more changeovers. That's what I just did in my supply chain area for finished products. And can you increase speed of the existing bottling lines? That gives me more available capacity. So I'm going to plug that in as well. And if I want to know if things now will play out well, I have a little nifty tool here called the production interval tool. And the production interval tool now sees that my production interval has gone to 5 days. And I've done something extra in terms of increased speed and SMAT. And I should be at a utilization rate of 84% of capacity there. So I should be okay. So having said all that, I'm going to calculate again once more. And yeah, let me then ask you, are we sure? We are sure, and give you another question. What do you think will happen with the many measures that I took? I took 6 in a row. That's quite a bit all over the place. The whole value chain was almost involved. What do you think? Will we get a better service level? Will we get so-called better production plan adherence? I also got some more capacity. Will we have less obsoletes? And as a fourth one, I wrote down, yeah, since I did so many things, I have no clue, to be honest, because and that is also sort of a warning to you. And Ed also said that, by the way, you need to prioritize. So if you're going to set up your supply chain differently, you may not be as hands-on as I just was, because then you may do too many things at a time, and then it becomes quite hard to find cause-effect relationships. I have a little bit of extra knowledge about this tool, so that's how I can go in like this. But actually, that is not leading by example. That's simply just bluffing a bit. But yeah, that's what I did. So we expect better service level. We expect better production plan adherence. We expect less obsoletes. Yeah, and I also confused a number of you. Sorry for that. But I thought that was simply truthful to also plug that in, because I can imagine that happens. If you make in 3 functional areas, you make all these changes. So let's see what has happened. Where are we now in terms of results? Whoa, we are at 6.8%. Isn't that wonderful? So we are at 6.8%. What were the things that we thought that we could do? Did we get a better service level? Did we get also less carbon? And we have a very nice tool to check that all at once. If we go to a role before here, if we go to a functional area in the round that we finished, we have an analysis tool. And the analysis tool, if I compare round 5 to 6, because I just finished round number 6, and if I look at my customers, how did I do in terms of service level based on order lines? And how did I do in terms of carbon footprints? Still promising 1 kilogram of carbon. When I execute this query, then, well, you can see actually that service level has gone up. That was one of the options. Did I get a better service level? Did I get less obsoletes, hence less carbon footprint? Well, we need to check the obsoletes later, because we can't see that in the same view, but you do see that carbon footprint has significantly been reduced. And now, yeah, let's also look at carbon then. Where are we? Let's also look, let's see where we are in terms of obsoletes. We go to the sales area. We have a dashboard there with obsoletes. Where did our obsoletes go? Yeah, obsoletes dropped 4.8%, still there, but yeah, a lot better in that sense. And did also production plan adherence go up? To go to operations, I think it was at 85 before we went in. So mixing and bottling tells me now I'm at 90% production plan. So that means in 90% of the cases I'm able to produce according to plan. Now I want to do one final thing before we go into Q&A. What I just saw was that I did a lot better on carbon and service level. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to sales and I'm going to plug in exactly what I just showed that we performed at. We performed at a level, going to round number 7, going to my, so what we actually did towards food and groceries, we produced 1.03 kilograms of carbon towards them, and we had a service level of 97.7. So I'm going to walk the talk now with all my 3 clients, and then we're going to see where we're going to end up. And then at the same time, as we calculate that, we can open up the Q&A in a minute as well. So 97.8 here. I did exactly 1 kilogram for land market, I saw. So plugging in deal, and then finally we go to 97.6. Sorry, 6, and then we go to carbon footprint here. We had 1.27. They only take the PET bottles. That seems to be causing more carbon. Plug in this deal, and yeah, and then calculate the outcome. And final question to you: what do you prefer? Do you prefer to underpromise and overdeliver? Do you prefer to overpromise and then underdeliver? Or would you like actually to deliver exactly what was promised? That's just out of curiosity. Where would you like to be? Underpromise, overdeliver. That seems to be attractive to most people here. Now the thing with the fresh connection is that if you underpromise and you overdeliver, you get a bonus. Clients actually like that, but you would have gotten even more money if you would have promised what you were capable of. You wouldn't have gotten no bonus, but your so-called contracted sales revenue would have been a lot higher than promising less, having less contracted sales revenue and a modest bonus. But this is just giving us a bit of an idea on what people like. So there's no good or bad answer here in that sense. So that's just me being curious. So I'm going back to the simulation, and look here. We brought the result from minus 8.8 all the way up towards 8.1 positive percentage, and I'm already in my in overtime radar. So I have 6 minutes on the clock before I need to hand over to Peter to make sure that he has enough time. Did you see any questions in the chat that we need to go into?
Yeah, 2 even. Peter Murray asked if water and energy visible in the fresh connection, are they visible as elements of carbon and cost? Water and energy?
Yeah, water. So I said we're going to focus on carbon mostly, but of course water and energy also factor in, you could say, as elements of sustainability. So that is why we brought them in, to also shine a little bit of light on them. Our carbon footprint module focuses mostly on carbon, and you could even say indirectly. To have energy, that has a carbon effect. To have clean water also has a carbon effect. So you can tie everything back there. That's a bit more layered. But of course, you also have a direct sort of saving, a reduction there as well. Yeah.
And also Pablo Vega asked whether it would make sense to ask a team to use the traditional ROI while asking another to aim for the high 3 Ps. Well, the question is actually directed to Ed. But,
yeah.
You can choose who to answer.
Yeah, nice experiment, I would say.
I can take a first shot at the answer, and feel free to add to this if you want, Hans. But I think it's a didactical choice, right? My consideration probably would be to at least make sure that both teams will be comfortable with because basically you're imposing something, which there's nothing necessarily bad to that. Just make sure that they feel comfortable with that they're not forced to do something that they don't want to do really. By contrast, it's always interesting. You can of course also say, well, you can say that to all the teams. Okay, let's do this with traditional ROI, and then let's all try and make the best out of it, aiming for the high 3 Ps. In this case, it's only 2 Ps really, because there's the carbon footprint, which is a very specific one. In the terms of the 3 Ps, it's going to be a bit more tricky, because then you get a debate, of course, because it's, if you aim for 2 Ps, will you do better than if you aim for 3? Well, that's quite an interesting question. Yep. And I think the answer is not so straightforward necessarily. Maybe Hans, you want to say something about that in a moment. There's another comment I saw there, Pablo. You said, does the simulation take into consideration scope 1, 2, and 3? 1, yes, definitely. In the carbon footprint statement that Hans has been using, you see that your own activities are there in terms of CO2. There is a part related to energy, because scope 2, as far as I'm aware, is the external energy supplies you work with. So yes, although in the variant that Hans was showing you, you don't have a choice for an energy supplier.
True.
Because that could be something, of course, in there as well. And scope 3, which is the rest of your supply chain, well, yes, it's in there as well, because you have your suppliers in there, and actually the production of your suppliers is counted as well. So that definitely works.
Yeah. Yeah, but it also we would also like to cater to more needs there, and that brings me back to my PowerPoint, and brings me also back to Peter very quickly, because yeah, we aim to juggle the 3Ps soon. So the carbon footprint module of the Fresh Connection, that's only a very little part of the total. Actually, I also explained very clearly, Ed. So we are in development with what we call the triple connection, related to the content that you also shared with us at the beginning of this mini conference. So there, yeah, we aim to juggle these 3Ps soon, in terms of that we can have people go through a simulation where they have to do this juggle, and that's what we have called the triple connection. It will be launched in Q3 of 2022. It's again an online business simulation game. It has teams of 4 and 4 available VP roles, and it's about the cocoa supply chain, and that's also a very nice bridge to Peter van Grinsven, because Peter has many years of experience in this cocoa supply chain, especially when it comes to sustainability initiatives. So without any further ado, we've done the Q&A, so this slide is superfluous, as they say. Without any further ado, I would like to hand over to Peter.
Okay, thank you very much. It was very enlightening. I'd never seen the game as it was played, and this was really interesting. I will not waste much time on introducing myself, Peter van Grinsven. I've worked with a large multinational, chocolate multinational, for 36 years in commercial roles, and for many years as a sustainability director. I didn't only work in cocoa, but I've worked in coffee, tea, cashew, seaweed, and a few other crops. And what I'm going to tell you are my personal experiences from the cocoa industry, related very much to what Ed has been telling you, but it also translates very well to many of the other crops I've worked on. I do want to tell you a little bit, well, firstly, I wish we had Ed's insights 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when we started on the sustainability journey in cocoa. We've learned a lot of things the hard way that Ed is now sort of like putting very eloquently on a screen, but I guess that's also accumulated learning. So I'm going to tell you things that you'll recognize from the earlier presentations, that there aren't actually real strong instruments for the 3PP business case, but we can't sit still. We have to move on, because we have plenty of challenges and they're not going to solve themselves. There's going to be plenty of trade-offs. I'm going to show you some, and the win-win-lose, there may actually be quite a number of win-lose-lose scenarios as well. Now, how do you get many different stakeholders to the table and agree on something and commit? You'll see that coming back on what I'm telling you. How do you get alignment in a competitive industry? And how do you get consensus as to what needs to be done, and how do you measure it? There are so many metrics, so many standards now, that it's become really confusing. There's a few other things I'm going to throw in, which is enablers such as governments, donors, etc., the roles they're playing in the sustainability journey. It's also about how do you, how well is civil society supporting, or consumers supporting industry on the road to sustainability? Are they helpful, or are they at times not so helpful? Do I make decisions just for myself, or do I need to keep an eye on my competition? Because in the end, it's all about market share, and in the end, I need to stay profitable. I need to make sure my consumers like me, so I can't just do what I think I need to do. I also need to look into what my competitors are doing. There's a lot of emotional issues like child labor, gender balance, etc. How do you quantify those? How do you give these a place in your considerations? And the other thing, even if you think you know what you should be doing, but there is a risk of failure, would you actually want to take that route? Because you might get penalized, if you fail. The scoring that others would put on me as a company would be quite devastating. So is there an effect of knowing what the right thing is and not doing it in fear of failure? So I'm going to tell you 13 incidences where things didn't work the way they should have. Very big initiatives, but they didn't quite work. But there is a 14th optimistic note, and all the failures and optimistic note are linked to what you've already heard. I hope you can identify how that fits. I need to tell you that I'm going to, what I'm going to tell you is about an industry that has issues with people, planet, and prosperity, all three of them. And the good news is that industry has actually, every company in the industry has got the same problem. It's like a burning platform, and everybody has to chip in to try to save the platform before you can start worrying too much about your own company. So it's a way, a very unfortunate way, but it's one way that the tragedy of the commons, where nobody wants to invest in fear that somebody else is running away with your investment, in cocoa, because we all have the same problems. That's a little bit sort of like a side issue. I'm also going to tell you that the story I'm telling you is trial and error. Very often poorly thought through solutions, often under pressure from external agents, civil society, governments, consumers, but there's learning at every step, and we'll see how that goes. You'll see that when 20 years ago industry started, there was great alignment, a great coalition, but over time things have started falling apart because competitiveness creeps in if you don't watch out for that. And I'm going to end up talking about how carbon actually is a great opportunity, because all companies have a massive commitments towards carbon neutrality. Insetting is becoming really important, and as it happens, plantation crops, even at smallholder level, are big agents of sequestering carbon. So this is actually something that helps. A quick background on cocoa that you need to know, otherwise you can't put the story in context. It's a tree crop, as you can imagine. It's not been very well researched, but there is good planting material. There are good and responsible inputs, fertilizer, etc. But the 5 to 6 million cocoa farmers in the world, and that's about 40 million people if you look at the families that depend directly on cocoa farming, of those, very few actually have access to planting material and to fertilizer, or they can't afford it. So yes, there are solutions, but farmers actually aren't actually using it. The other thing that's important is that cocoa, like coffee and a few other crops, is a non-perishable high-value crop. It means you could grow it in the middle of nowhere, and as long as you dry it and you can sell it at one point in time, it still has high value at farm gate. There are not that many crops like that, but it explains why cocoa is grown in areas where farmers aren't trying other things. It sounds great, but it's also very limiting for farmers because there aren't many alternatives for them to do. So just put some numbers on it. Côte d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast in English, produces 40% of the world market. Ghana, another 15%. Nigeria, Cameroon, between them, another 5%. 60% of cocoa comes from these 4 countries. That's very, very hard to bypass as an industry. You cannot have a business without doing business with these countries. And these countries would go bankrupt without the revenue from cocoa. And there's enormously, the number of people living off cocoa directly in these countries is very large. So governments aren't going to walk away from cocoa. Farmers aren't going to walk away from cocoa because there aren't very many alternatives. And the only thing you can do with a cocoa processing or cocoa chocolate or a chocolate making factory is to make chocolate. You can't use them for anything else. Those are enormously expensive factories to build. So also industry isn't easily going to walk away from the industry they're in spite of all the problems. So that's good. Everybody is committed, even though it's for the wrong reasons very often. Now, the consumer impact is actually very large in cocoa because cocoa is produced by very poor farmers, but it's eaten by pretty rich consumers in developed countries, people that are educated, have access to all sorts of information, and people that are quite opinionated and not afraid to share their points of view. So these consumers and civil society can actually hold chocolate companies with their feet to the fire because they can't go anywhere. Think of coffee. Everybody drinks coffee, also in poor countries. Yes, you can hold coffee companies responsible in the rich countries, but a lot of coffee is consumed in poor countries where there is no pain. Oil palm, same thing. Tea, same thing. So cocoa is quite special in the fact that you can so easily sort of like hold chocolate companies responsible because they're all making their profit in the developed countries. So I just want to move on now with my 13 failures and the one optimistic story. Basically, it's not a long time ago, turn of the century, that companies started thinking about sustainability of the crop, and when they started identifying what the issues were, it was kind of shocking. It was clear that the future of the cocoa industry, based on cocoa farming, was in pretty poor shape, and that availability of cocoa beans isn't all that sure in the future, which, if you have a chocolate company, is pretty bad news. Companies started with corporate social responsibility, and they got together, formed the World Cocoa Foundation. Everybody was sitting on the same burning platform, and the first action they came up with was farmer field schools, which were borrowed from the Green Revolution in Indonesia on rice. It was a massive effort. Everybody chipped in, but unfortunately, many people didn't exactly understand cocoa agronomy. Few people understood what makes farmers adopt things. Behavioral economics, behavior change wasn't part of the insights in those days. Companies weren't exactly sure how much responsibility they should or had to take. And there were a number of unconnected activities, very pillarized between companies. So it was a good try, but it was quite fragmented. It failed in delivering high income to farmers because farmers couldn't or didn't want to adopt what the recommendations were. The farmer field schools was very much the learning in this whole thing is that the big one, we can work together as an industry if you're on a burning platform, but the first effort on farming field school as a training, it was not the magic solution we all thought it was going to be. So some with a few companies together, some only one company. Those programs still exist, but they're small and fragmented to the overall scene. And the learning there is that if you want to get impact, you're going to need to work in a coalition and do aligned things. And well, the other thing that we learned is that keeping a coalition alive is actually quite hard. When you have the initial energy to put it together, it's great, but after a few years, the energy wanes, and then you really have to work hard to keep that coalition together. Now, child labor became a real issue early in the 21st century, and it absorbed a lot of energy from companies. Companies basically were panicking because child labor goes straight back to your reputation, and nobody likes child labor. Small companies started profiling themselves as being better than others. Saying like, well, we manage child labor, we haven't got child labor in our value chain, which proved to be untrue. But the thinking was set that some companies can manage and other companies just don't want to, which is not quite fair, but it's something that, well, we still have to live with that mindset. So there were some not solutions, but activities were formed, which are still in place today. It's called CLMRS, Child Labor Monitoring and Resolutions. But it's not a very good tool, but it's the only thing that industry has, and companies are not going to walk away from it because that would mean that consumers would think that you don't care about child labor. So it's a strange thing that everybody is supporting a pretty poor tool simply because there's nothing else. The big learning here is that child labor was not something that anybody saw coming. It came in and it just took over everything that companies were thinking about and wanted to do because it became so important. And the learning is you can plan, but you have to be flexible enough to deal with the unseen or the unexpected problems. Certification, it was mentioned before, it became very popular. It was driven by a very large corporation, and then other companies were shamed into doing the same thing. And it moved certification from a fairly small program into a mainstream program for which neither the certification organizations were prepared nor the companies. NGOs started training farmers to be certified, but there were no buyers linked to that, so farmers made expenses, couldn't sell. All that didn't really help the reputation of certification, and companies had way too high expectations. They were disappointed in what they came back with after a while, the results that came up from it, which is a little bit a shame, because there are some good things that certification did do. The learning is we shouldn't expect miracles from a fairly generic solution, and we should cherish the small wins and carry those forward, apart from just walking away from a program completely. Gender and youth employment and needs for education, malnutrition, addressing that problem have always been issues, but they became more sort of like coming to the forefront. They're now embedded in nearly every program I can think of. Now, the learning is that it takes a lot of effort to work on these things, and the changes are very, very slow. And arguably, it may not be sort of like the most efficient way to allocate resources to this early in the aim for sustainability. But consumers and civil society want it, and companies will just have to abide by it. They just have to deliver what consumers want. It's not a choice. You want to make your choices, but sometimes other people, other organizations make the choices for you. Landscapes became the new sort of like promising way to address issues, but landscapes, it's about variety of commodities together. It's working together with local governments, etc., planning organizations. It's really hard to do. It's a nice concept, but within that, you would still have to work on your commodities because landscape organizations aren't going to be able to deal with that level of insight. That was the learning we had there. Farmers aren't implementing some of the stuff they should be implementing or would like to implement simply because they can't afford it. That's been recognized for a long time, but farmer financing has been really, really difficult because payback isn't all that sure. Farmers have no assets. And even though farmer financing is recognized as a must-have, there isn't a lot of it. There are a few large programs now which are being developed, but the route to the farmer is still difficult. And the learning is there that financing is important. Without financing, farmers aren't going to be able to turn their farms around and grow cocoa sustainably and introduce carbon sequestering trees. But we need to start working together and share risks of financing if we want to move on that item. There was a large new program put together by the World Cocoa Foundation trying to get the same level of engagement that they had earlier. All large cocoa companies worked together on it, but the program was based on self-reporting against poorly defined criteria. And it ended up that companies were trying to present their best case scenarios. It became sort of like a competitiveness game. The program was not a great success. It wasn't repeated. And the learning there is that programs should not offer an opportunity for companies to sort of like become competitive with each other. And if you don't have good KPIs and good criteria and a neutral data collection system away from self-reporting, it's going to be hard to know what you're doing and to draw conclusions from it and follow the way forward. I'm nearly there. The 9th point was living income. It's become a big thing. Everybody agrees that farmers would need a certain minimum level of income to look after their families, but it's hard to generate that because farmers are, most farmers are maybe at 35–40% of what their living income ought to be. So how do you get there? Smaller companies are saying that they can do it. They have a few specialty products that they're selling at high prices, and then they can pass that money on to farmers, and then they say, look at us, we can do this, so why doesn't everyone else? But these niche solutions aren't really applicable to the whole value chain, but it does create this feeling that companies aren't willing to address issues simply by throwing more money at it. because it's just too complex for the average consumer that doesn't go into detail to understand that. So the living income, that's the learning. Living income is the right target, but it's far away, and maybe we should have milestones in the middle that help us sort of like show that we're on the path to living income, rather than looking at the full $4,500, $5,000 per family that we would like farmers to make, because that's going to take 10, 15 years to get there, and it's demoralizing. Deforestation became a big thing, and with that, agroforestry, which is a great idea, but unfortunately, the new efforts in this direction, which was the Cocoa and Forest Initiative, that I think 32 out of the 36 large chocolate companies signed up for, or 33. But they are now at the point of having gone into so many programs that didn't quite work, that they're now just recycling money from older projects into new ones. So it's no more new money coming in. It's now old money being reallocated to different programs, which is not a good thing. We had many NGOs popping up, planting trees left, right, and center that farmers didn't see the point for and didn't want to look after. And these trees actually don't deliver a lot in carbon, because they're not the sort of like quick carbon sequestering trees. They don't deliver any value to farmers. And there isn't a lot of support in farmer circles to continue growing these trees. So we need to learn from that, that unless you identify what is the value proposition for farmers, why should farmers want to grow these trees, you should perhaps refrain in advising farmers what to grow, because you may do more damage by replacing valuable trees like cocoa with trees that over time don't deliver any value to farmers, which is okay when people have plenty of money. It's not okay when a family has $2,000 per year only, and you're taking a few dollars away from that. Very recently, well, 2 years ago, the idea was, well, just pay more for cocoa. Cocoa is too cheap, even though farmers in Indonesia and in Peru are doing very well. They're smiling all the way to the bank. In West Africa, because they're not very good at cocoa growing, farmers are very poor, and the idea is, let's pay more. It's become a very popular idea that's been taken up by the governments of Ivory Coast and Ghana, and they've now put together what they would call a income differential that everybody has to pay, $400 per ton, which is 15% of the value of cocoa, that you'd have to pay to the governments, and that money is then supposed to go down to the farmers. And industry cannot do without Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, so they have no choice but to go with it. Whereas the macroeconomics of this would tell you that if you just pay more for cocoa in one country, then it's a false signal, and farmers are going to grow more cocoa when the problem is there is already too much of it. The second effect is that companies that are not Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire can offer their cocoa a little bit cheaper than what it would cost from Ghana and Ivory Coast, and therefore you're now creating opportunities for other countries more cocoa, and there's actually not a great demand for it. We then go to regenerative agriculture. That's a very recent thing. It is not very well defined, not at all actually, or described for cocoa. There's opportunities there, but again, what's in it for the farmer? Why would the farmer want to adopt practices that take time and effort when he is not able to identify the benefits? This really becoming now very popular is linked to climate change. Reducing greenhouse gases and increased sequestering of carbon in trees. And of course, any tree crop you could make into an agroforestry crop. Well, not all, tea is an exception, but an oil palm, but cocoa, coffee do very well as agroforestry crops. Again, the learning there is that just planting more trees is not a solution. Some trees sequester a lot more carbon quicker than other trees do. And unless farmers can see the point of growing these trees, which, carbon is a nice amount of money if you get it, but carbon by itself is not going to make the business case for your farm. So you're still going to have to optimize your key crop, in this case, cocoa. So we need to learn to model that and make carbon attractive for farmers as an add-on, something they would get from growing agroforestry trees that would also deliver fruits or timber or something like that. We are not there. There are opportunities, but we still don't have the knowledge and information we need. So these were the 13 things out of many others that I've seen and where things went wrong. We've learned from it. We're getting closer to understanding what needs to happen. But if I now look into what the solution could be, the solution is complex, really complex. And the big issue is that if you want to work on improving cocoa as a solution for the cocoa value chain, you're not going to succeed. The problem is that there is too much effort on cocoa. We need farmers to diversify. We need farmers to allocate some of their land to other crops and have lesser land with cocoa and then increase yields on that. But if you're in the middle of nowhere and you grow cocoa because it is a non-perishable that you can still sell as long as it's dried, then what are the other opportunities? So what can we do? Agroforestry, it's an opportunity. We need to do a value proposition and model that better. And then agroforestry should include crop diversification, but we need to bring the value chains for the crops that today aren't traded in these areas. We need to work with farmers more efficiently. We need to understand behavior change better. We need to understand better what behavioral economics are all about. Chocolate companies are experts in manipulating people in buying things you don't necessarily need. Chocolate is not a need of life, but people are buying it, and you have no idea how much science there is behind where chocolate is placed in the supermarket. M&Ms that I hide for children, the expensive chocolates as a luxury item in different areas. Then the sort of like crunchy bits, which are at the checkout counters where you put them on, okay, I'm standing there. Yeah, I feel a little bit peckish. Why don't I pick up a chocolate bar? There's a lot of science. If you were to use science like that into working with farmers and help them making choices, that would be great. And we need, of course, building up better and larger financing systems. So I hope I haven't discouraged you about how difficult sustainability is. I hope that I've given you some insight that at every step you learn something, and there are still opportunities, there is still a view as to how we might succeed. So I'll leave it at that. I hope I haven't confused you, and I hope I haven't demoralized you or sort of like made you worried about the future of the cocoa industry. There will be solutions because nobody, not industry, not government, and not farmers. I'm done.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. You were breaking away a bit in the end. You shared with us what you wanted to share?
Yep, I did.
Good.
And I think the end was a bit.
So you're breaking away every once in a while, I'm afraid. Can you hear Peter properly, Rada?
No, it's breaking a bit.
So let's not worry too much about Indonesia. And apologies for that. I don't know what to do about it. It's the internet connection here.
Yeah, we picked up 95% of your story, Peter. So that's good. I do hope that if we have questions for Peter, that we can also relay them to you. Maybe it's good that you can also read the chat yourself, of course. Do we have questions for Peter in the chat, Rada?
No, not yet.
Sure. Yep.
But Pablo is saying that those are really great insights. So it's not an easy thing.
No, I think what was good, Peter, you said, I hope I didn't discourage you to keep talking in candy and chocolate related business. You didn't sugarcoat it. I think that's a good thing. This takes real effort, long time effort, and that we also should. What I also took away from it is that we also, as consumers, well, you already mentioned how we are being seduced in the supermarket all the time. But we can get carried away with so much of these initiatives that we think are great. We plant a tree somewhere, or we are, of course, bombarded with all kinds of things that we can do also to sort of make ourselves feel good, I guess. But what I took away from you is that though, yeah, there are simply not those easy solutions. So you need to really think this through. And on the other hand, you have sort of, if civil society can almost dictate, if they believe something is good, then they dictate you as a company to do it. You can't walk away from it because that hurts reputation, brand value, all these.
Yeah, and that's actually, it's one of the frustrations I have. We should work hand in hand, but there's not much trust from civil society towards corporations, and to some extent that's justified, but corporations aren't evil either. Companies want to be successful, and companies do need farmers to be successful, otherwise they're not going to have a supply of cocoa beans in the future. So for different reasons, there are good, it should be possible to work together, but there is too much distrust from civil society to companies, and the other way around. Companies don't believe that civil society or NGOs are sort of like willing to work with industry. It's a hard nut to crack. It's one about trust.
Yeah. Well, trust is that's, I think, a major theme here as well in business anyway. So especially I think in these kind of improvement endeavors that you're on. Is there a case in another industry that can be celebrated as well? You mentioned that when it came to working with farmers in the beginning of this century, people looked at farmer field schools, looking at the example with rice farmers. So that apparently did work. Did that work? Did I understand it correctly?
Farmer field schools works with rice because you can plant rice 2 or 3 times per year. So whereas with a tree crop, when you have your trees, you're going to be stuck with them for 25 years. And if they're the wrong genetics, well, you've got a problem. If your soil isn't good, well, it's hard to dig it all up and do some major soil investment. So tree crops are a lot more difficult to do. The problem as well is that if you train, then you have knowledge, but then to put knowledge to practice, you need people to coach you. And every family has got different aspirations, different financial opportunities or constraints, and farms are very different from each other. So just providing training and then hoping that farmers will use that training it's a little bit naive, thinking also about our own worlds. Well, yeah, we've all been educated, to many of us, to very high levels, but that doesn't mean that you're actually going to use that information. You need to be in the right environment, and many of us do need seniors above us to tell us what we need to do and to be corrected once in a while. And so do farmers. Farmers need motivation, and farmers need at times they need some help to stay on course. And that's been missing. It is changing. Companies start understanding that coaching is important, and companies are now starting to put plans together with individual farmers, but it's very expensive a resource, as you can imagine, and it's still early days to say whether this is going to be successful or not. But the efforts in that arena are going the right direction, and there are also efforts to put together or to use an existing mechanism to put diagnostics on farms and to monitor progress, not monitoring increase in yield, which in tree crops takes forever, but to monitor whether farmers are doing the right thing so that we could expect them to be more successful in the future. And that should then incentivize companies to invest more in these farmers, because these are going to be the farmers that will provide companies with the cocoa beans they need in the future. So there are a few examples as things going right, but they still have to prove themselves whether they're actually as viable as they seem to be at this point in time.
Okay, so still a lot of ground to cover. That's what I understand.
Yes, but there's no time to stand still, because, well, what I didn't say, but about 50% of cocoa trees are pretty old, 25, 30 years or older, and they're at the end of their sort of like productive life. The soils haven't been looked after, so most nutrients are depleted. The soil health is also shot. So there's plenty of issues. We have no time. We cannot wait for better tools 10, 15 years from now, because there'll be nothing left. So we have to do what we can today, even if we know it's not as good as it should be, because doing nothing is not an option.
Clear. Okay, well, fingers crossed for chocolate consumption in the future then. Like you said, we don't need it to survive, but we do like it, I'm afraid. So, all right.
We're helping farmers, yep.
Yeah, yeah. Radha, is there any question in the chat that we should look at?
No, not at the moment.
All right, then. Well, for those of you who want to stay on in the call for a little while longer, that's of course okay.